Hello and welcome to this video on creating an air layer for bonsai. Air layers are one of the more convenient means of propagating a plant to produce both a good bonsai starter and one that has many desirable features. Further, the result is a direct clone of the parent plant, which means you should get all of the same functionality and features in terms of traits. In simple terms, an air layer is taking a branch or part of the trunk and cutting off the part that accounts for the flow of sap in the cambium. This forces it to grow roots, or rather obviously die. The advantage of this is that while it can grow, it also has some support, but it's greatly reduced from the parent plant. Because it still has some support, it will keep growing and living, but it is far less likely to die as well. That makes the propagation more likely to succeed. When you do this, you also get all of the benefits of being able to select not only the desirable branch or trunk of your choice, but all the features thereof. For example, do you want a nice thick nabari? Well, you can achieve that. Do you want many possible new branch options? Choose a branch that's already well developed, and so on and so forth. The process of an air layer is reasonably straightforward. Start by rather obviously choosing a branch or trunk of your choice. This is one way in which air layers are a better option than cuttings or other propagation methods. You can choose very thick branches or very developed branches, and in some cases, take the top of a trunk that already exists. Whereas with many cuttings, you want to choose something very thin and very early in development, let's say. In terms of air layers, it gives you options that are very thick, very developed, and gives you many diverse options to choose from. You could just as easily choose a very thin or underdeveloped branch and go with that, or you could choose a very thick and developed branch. It's your choice, and again, many choices, and you can see from this video that we have a series of selections to be made. Admittedly, all of them are fruit trees, but this will apply to any species you're looking at. We remove the leaves and branches in the area we're going to apply the air layer to. For some species, this is more important than for others. For example, maples in some cases only develop roots from the nodes, while for other species they will grow wherever it is that the cambium is exposed. Some species will be more finicky about this than others, so be aware of it. This brings us to exposing the cambium itself. You need to make 3 cuts. One is at the top of where the plant will be cut from. This goes around the branch or the trunk. In other words, if the tree was growing directly upwards, this would be a horizontal trunk going right around the circumference. The second is at the bottom of where you will cut the branch or trunk from. This should be about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch to 5 centimeters or 2 inches from your other horizontal cut. The last cut you will make is a vertical cut. This goes straight up between the 2 circular cuts you have already made. With these 3 elements together, you should be able to just peel away the bark in one piece. Think of it as similar to how toilet paper will unwrap from the roll. Doing so should leave you with minimal damage to the cambium. And this is important as the cambium is where the roots will grow from. It's why you want to minimize any harm that you're going to do. By making these 3 successive cuts, you're able to make 1 vertical cut, which will allow you to remove it, and the 2 other cuts that are horizontal should be reasonably shallow. Other methods have you scraping away at the bark to expose the cambium, which can work, it's just somewhat more risky. In terms of what you do after this, you can choose to apply a rooting hormone or agent to improve the odds of success. Now understand, this is a improved odds, not a surefire solution. Some people seem to have just as much luck doing nothing at all, and others again use honey. Your choice will be up to you, it's just, this is something that can improve odds if you found other methods have not worked as intended. With the cambium exposed, you can now take your propagating substrate. The substrate will vary by region, but generally useful examples include sphagnum moss, coir, peat moss, propagating soil or sand, and similar. These are all materials that retain only a little bit of moisture and certainly not too much while being easily penetrated by the roots of the plant. Moisten the media of your choice. In the case of sphagnum moss and coir, this should be done before removing the cambium, as it takes time to soak, swell, and become ready to use. Once it is ready, squeeze it well before applying it so all the excess moisture is removed, and the resulting media is only slightly damp and certainly not soggy. Pack this around your air layer site. Now there are different approaches to this. Some people will lay it out flat and try and wrap it around like a blanket. Others simply have it as a mass and try and squeeze it around the propagating site. Different approaches for different people, and it will be based on what you find easiest. And in those terms, the next step will overlap with this, particularly as regards the application of media. If you're using a propagating bulb or similar device that goes by several different names, but all have the same purpose, you can, to a certain extent, skip the application step. And that's because these are all solid, light-proof tools that will hold the media tightly around the branch or trunk. You first pack the media into this, and then you apply it directly to the branch or trunk. You don't need to apply your growing media first, and that's why you can skip that step to an extent. These can be readily printed with a 3D printer or bought from any number of online stores, or you can use the more traditional long-term option. If you're going to be using a propagating bulb, make sure you tie it on with a piece of wire or similar to ensure it doesn't fall off unexpectedly. If you're going to go with the, let's say, traditional option, you do so with the purpose of three things in mind. First, you need to allow for the substrate or media. We've been through this, then a plastic wrap or bag, and finally a solid cover. The substrate, as we've explained, is to support the growth. The plastic wrap, however, is to keep moisture in the air layer site. Something like plastic kitchen wrap works very well for this, but even a plastic shopping bag can be used, so long as it's at least somewhat waterproof. The solid cover is the last, but perhaps most important part, and this can be made from any number of materials, or if you're so inclined, you can even spray paint the outside of plastic wrap. The reason you have to go to this effort is that you must block light from the air layer region. If you do not block light, the roots will not grow at all for some species, and for others, they'll behave in a way that makes it hard to succeed in propagating. Finally, ensure the way you wrap this leaves a small opening to be able to add water or spray the air layer on occasion if required. We found it useful to have a small stick and put this at the top of where we're doing the propagating, and wrap around it and then remove the stick at the end. This gives you a small opening that you can pour water into. For fast-growing species that take very quickly the propagation, this isn't necessary, but for slow-growing species that propagate more tediously, water will eventually be required, and it's more to keep the roots moist than it is anything else. Now, for the last step of a sort, it's waiting, and to be clear, it's waiting for a long time. The general rule of thumb for this approach, if you're not going to rely on time, is to, feel the air layer basically, and this is more based on older methods where you're using something like plastic wrap. When the root ball mass is reasonably solid, you should be able to consider it done, as the solidness should come from the roots growing right throughout it. For solid propagating tools, this is not so easy to measure. In that case, you can either watch for roots growing out from the bulb or open it up and look inside. You want to avoid doing that if you can, however, and mostly because you may damage the root mass. The time taken can vary a lot, anywhere from 2 months or 60 days to 4 months or 120 days. At the end of this time, you can remove the air layer simply by cutting it off with a pair of secateurs or a large branch lopper. You then unwrap the root ball very carefully, and then plant the new air layer into a pot with appropriate soil and leave for a year to become established. This is how you can take existing trees that you have and turn one tree into hundreds over time for practically nothing. More so if you want established trees that look like they've been growing for years if not decades. If you want to get trees that you simply can't source elsewhere and more. Air layering is extremely successful, relatively straightforward, and overall, leads to, well, effectively free trees. Not quite as free as cuttings, but still. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.